You don't often see exhibitions of Henry Moore prints. It doesn't happen very often. There was a press, or it's still going. It's based originally around Cambridge, called the Curwen Press. And at the Curwen, all of the great British artists who wanted to make lithographs went there. And there was one man there who'd spent 60 years at the Curwen Press working with all these great artists, and his name was Stanley Jones. He died in February of this year, aged 90, and we were fortunate enough to be able to buy his archive. And he worked with Henry Moore right through his career. Let me introduce now this gentleman here, Dominic Kemp. I think I first met him watching telly.
Oh God, don't.
Because Dominic started life as an actor. He's also worked as an auctioneer, and he has his own business buying and selling prints. And the biggest thing, of course, was that he went to the Curwen and he knew Stanley Jones. We are very privileged to have him here.
So here we've got a photograph of the Curwen Press. This is it in its final state, which was at Chilford Hall in Cambridge. And Stanley set up what still exists, his sort of legacy, which was the Curwen Print Study Centre. And he was a mentor and a teacher and an artist in his own right. He was a brilliant technician. He was master printer, master lithographer of the Curwen Studio, and it was a pioneering studio. It was the most important place in Britain to make lithographs after the war. Important to remember that actually, because Henry Moore was born in 1898, so when they first met in 1958, I mean, Henry Moore would have been, 60, and he would have been old enough to be Stanley's father. But Stanley was the teacher, the mentor, and taught me everything I know about lithography and raised Henry Moore's game. And to a degree, they went on a journey together because Stanley was pioneering the technique, and Henry Moore was so keen and eager and tenacious, that was his spirit, to learn, that he went with it. And so there's a quote here I've got, which is really useful, from Stanley, talking about 1958. He says, "Though I did not know it at the time, this was to be the start of Moore's lifelong association with the studio, which would become an important element in both the studio's development and the artist's oeuvre." So Henry Moore started, like many artists, making prints because he was incredibly popular. As I mentioned, he was 60, he was already a world famous artist, and there was an enormous demand for his work, and you just couldn't the sculptures were expensive in those, and you can't produce so many. So rather, commercially minded, he turned to prints to, satisfy the demand, basically. But then it became something else as he progressed and started working more and more with Stanley. And as Stanley progressed, lithography itself, the whole idea of it, they were both able to produce something like an early lithograph. But let's start looking at some of the lithographs. So this is a relatively early lithograph that Stanley and Henry made together. It's 1963. It's not the earliest lithograph that Mike has. So this is the earliest example we have. And what does it say? What does it say? Second trial proof for Curwen variation, Stanley Jones, 1959. It was actually done in 58, the first one. And that's great. And initials Henry Moore. So this is 1981. This is towards the end. This is towards the beginning. And you can see there is a sophistication here that I'm not saying one's better or worse than the other, that doesn't exist here. So for example, the colours, the plates, if you like, the inks used are very basic, and the black is just obliterates the brown. And there are only two colours there and only two plates. And it's fairly, I love it because it's spontaneous, but it's relatively roughly done. And the background to me, feels a little bit kind of unresolved. It's relatively experimental. And as Henry Moore got, so the colours in particular, if we go over to this one here, you can see, and this is a direct result of working with Stanley, is you can see the colours overlay here and produce different colours. So he's putting a plate on top of the previous plate, and it's not obliterating the previous plate, it's allowing the previous plate to show through. And he's already, and so this area here, for example, is the flesh tone underneath the green dress tone. And it's producing a new line, something that must have come from the proofing process, the process of lithography, rather than the meticulous use of sketches, which is how Henry Moore started, and which is what Stanley tried to sort of divert him out of. It's simple, it's just using thinner inks and teaching the artist that you can, yes, if you want to use a rich ink and get that effect, yes you can. You can use both, or you can use that. Part of Henry Moore's influence was ancient sculpture, ancient masks, ancient art, and the Egyptian, these very much, there's a statue in the British Museum of Ramesses, you know that one, Ramesses II sort of sitting in his sort of, and these seated figures were very much based on Egyptian figures, just like some of the reclining figures are based on chakmuls. So a chakmul is like a deity, and Henry Moore said, I freely admit that my main influence in my sculpture and my printmaking was ancient Mexican art. So a chakmul is 9th, 10th century stone sculpture by the pre-Columbian Mesoamerican, Aztecs, Mayans, people like that. Broad brushstroke there, and it's like a shabti from Egyptian times. It's like a grave good. It's a figure in the form of a rain spirit. It looks very much similar to that. So that seems like a typical Henry Moore looking reclining figure. And the chakmuls are figures that are, I'm going to do it, damn it. So they basically, oh, you've done it, thank God, I don't have to do it. There it is, there it is, there it is. You can see, can't you? It's the same sort of the thickness of the thighs, and they don't all look exactly the same. They're slightly different, but they all have their heads out to 90 degrees, and they always have a bowl. You can see there's a bowl on his stomach, and that's to put offerings to the god in, and he might be a representation of perhaps a slain warrior or high priest, someone important in the tribe. And so, yeah, that is Henry Moore's, that is direct influence, Henry Moore there. I've gone off on one there. So mother and child, another big theme with Henry Moore. It's not so much the Madonna and Child, which a lot of people think. He had one muse, one model only, and it was his wife, Irina Radetzky. She was Ukrainian. She was actually trained as a ballet dancer, and he met her before the Second World War. They married in 1929. They had one daughter, Mary, and that is what the mother and child images are all about. So he started off with sketches, and Henry Moore went through a journey with Stanley Jones, and Stanley tried to get him to not rely on sketches, but actually rely on the process itself, the proofing itself, to build the image. So you'd go into the studio with an idea, a nebulous idea, and start drawing something on a plate. And when it comes out, you see it and you think, ah, yes, now if I add, and then you do another one, you overlay it, you try, oh, not quite, I'll do another one, oh, that's good. And you're building the image through the proofing process itself. And that is what Henry Moore, under Stanley's tutelage, did from, I would say, about, there was another burst of activity in 1973 where he made, goodness me, something like, I think 25 30 lithographs, all in the space of a few months. This is again why you need to use a metal plate. And a burst of activity in 1963-64, which was again another 20 or so lithographs. So he had this fever, which Stanley used to call, yes, it was a sort of it was a fever and eagerness that, Henry Moore even knocked one of his studios in Perry Green into a print studio, so that he got so into the technique that he created his own studio in his own in the grounds of his own house in Perry Green in Much Haddam. He said towards the end of his life that the printmaking process helped to inform his work as a sculptor, because as a sculptor you can look round it, you can hug it, you can feel it, and it has a tactile quality which yes, you can get into in a different way to something that's two-dimensional. But he was able to experiment with texture and form in an experimental way that isn't so difficult to manipulate as a piece of stone, for example. And so he was able to make journeys through lithography and etching, which may have taken longer if he had relied solely on wood and stone.
Dominic, can I thank you for both your sharing your enthusiasm and your immense knowledge. It's tremendous to have someone like you coming and talking to us in this way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.